In Greenwich, Connecticut's elite social circles, a hardworking baker was about to discover her family's ultimate betrayal. What started as a Christmas homecoming took a shocking turn when she uncovered the truth about her stolen inheritance. Stella Jenkins wasn't your typical forgotten daughter. For years, she had sacrificed everything for family loyalty, known for putting others before herself. When she encountered her parents' lavish holiday celebrations funded by her grandmother's money, she had no idea she was walking into a financial crime spanning years. Stella's investigation would lead to IRS involvement that could destroy them all. What began as holiday festivities would become a federal case that shattered Connecticut's most respected family forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The December air carried the scent of pine and possibility as Stella Jenkins pulled her aging Honda into the circular driveway of the Whitmore family estate. Even after 28 years, the sight of her childhood home still caught her breath. Not from nostalgia, but from the stark reminder of everything she'd never quite belonged to. The Georgian colonial stood like a monument to old Connecticut money, its red brick facade adorned with pristine white shutters and enough Christmas greenery to supply a small forest. Through the tall windows, warm light spilled onto the manicured lawn, revealing glimpses of crystal chandeliers and the kind of holiday decorations that required professional installation. Stella's apartment in Boston, a cramped studio above a bakery where she worked 60-hour weeks, could fit into the Whitmore's foyer twice over. "Home sweet home," she murmured, grabbing her worn duffel bag from the passenger seat. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd driven 3 hours to a house where she'd always felt like a guest. The front door opened before she could reach for the brass knocker, revealing her mother Patricia in all her holiday glory. Patty Whitmore had mastered the art of seasonal perfection. From her cream cashmere sweater to her carefully coiffed blonde hair, every detail calculated to project warmth while maintaining an untouchable elegance. "Stella, darling." Patricia's embrace was brief but enthusiastic, the kind performed for an audience even when none was present. "You're just in time. Emma's friends are arriving any moment for the engagement celebration." Of course they were. Stella stepped into the foyer, breathing in the familiar mixture of expensive candles and her mother's signature perfume. The house had been transformed into a winter wonderland. Garland draped every banister, white roses filled crystal vases, and enough twinkling lights to power a small city created an ethereal glow throughout the first floor. "This is incredible, Mom. You've outdone yourself." The compliment came easily, though Stella couldn't help calculating the cost of such elaborate decorations. Her monthly rent wouldn't cover the flowers alone. "Oh, you know how I love the holidays. And Emma deserves the very best for her announcement party." Patricia's eyes sparkled with genuine joy, the kind Stella remembered from her own childhood accomplishments, before she'd learned that her achievements never quite measured up to the family's expectations. Emma's laughter echoed from the living room, that infectious sound that had always made people gravitate toward her younger sister. Stella found Emma surrounded by shopping bags from boutiques, whose names alone made Stella's bank account nervous. Wedding magazines spread across the antique coffee table like battle plans. "Stella!" Emma bounced up, her engagement ring catching the chandelier light in a spectacular display of fire and brilliance. The embrace she offered was warmer than their mother's, untainted by the subtle calculations that seemed to govern every interaction in this house. "I'm so glad you could make it. I was afraid you'd be stuck at work again." "I wouldn't miss it," Stella replied, meaning it despite everything. Emma's happiness was genuine, uncomplicated by the undercurrents that seemed to flow beneath every family gathering. At 25, Emma moved through the world with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in it. David Chen emerged from behind one of the towering Christmas trees, and Stella was struck again by how perfectly he complemented Emma. Where Emma was all golden hair and effervescent energy, David possessed a quiet strength that seemed to anchor her natural exuberance. His handshake was firm, his smile warm but observant. "Good to see you again, Stella. Emma's been talking about your bakery plans nonstop. How's that coming along?" The question should have felt supportive, but it landed with the weight of all her deferred dreams. "Still working on it." The business plan is nearly complete, and I've found the perfect location in the North End. It's just a matter of securing the funding. The inheritance from Grandma Eleanor should cover that, right? Emma's question was innocent, but Stella caught the quick glance her parents exchanged, a micro-expression that lasted barely a second, but felt loaded with meaning. "We should discuss that later, sweetheart," Patricia interjected smoothly, her hostess' smile never wavering. "Tonight is about celebrating Emma and David." Richard Whitmore appeared in the doorway, scotch in hand and wearing the kind of casual elegance that came from decades of custom tailoring. Her father had always possessed an aura of quiet authority, the result of years commanding respect in corporate boardrooms. But tonight, Stella noticed something different, a tightness around his eyes, a careful control in his movements that suggested stress beneath his polished exterior. "Stella, there's my hardworking daughter." His hug was genuine, carrying the scent of expensive cologne and single malt whiskey. "How's Boston treating you?" "Can't complain. The restaurant industry keeps me busy." She didn't mention the double shifts, the aching feet, or the way she'd been slowly saving every dollar toward her dream of opening her own sustainable bakery. Those details felt too raw, too real for the carefully curated atmosphere of this house. "Speaking of business," Emma chimed in, pulling Stella toward the couch, "you have to see the cake designs I've been looking at. David's family owns this amazing vineyard in Napa, and we're thinking of having the reception there. Can you imagine? A sunset ceremony overlooking the valley." The wedding magazines Emma thrust into her hands featured confections that belonged in art galleries rather than on tables. Each cake was a masterpiece of sugar architecture, with price tags that made Stella's professional eye widen in disbelief. "These are beautiful," she managed, though something cold was settling in her stomach. Emma's casual mention of Napa vineyards and custom cakes represented more money than Stella made in 2 years. "The vineyard sounds perfect, doesn't it? Daddy says money is no object for his little girl's special day." Emma's laugh was bright and untroubled, but Stella caught another look between her parents, this one lasting longer, carrying the weight of some private understanding. The doorbell chimed, saving Stella from having to respond. Within minutes, the house filled with Emma's friends and their parents, people who moved through the space with the easy familiarity of Connecticut's social elite. Stella recognized some faces from years of family gatherings. Jennifer Walsh, her parents' longtime friend and the estate attorney who'd handled Grandma Eleanor's will, among others. As the evening progressed, Stella found herself in her familiar role as the helpful daughter, passing hors d'oeuvre and refreshing drinks while Emma held court in the center of the room. It wasn't that her family deliberately excluded her, quite the opposite. They appreciated her willingness to help, praised her work ethic, and spoke proudly of her culinary talents. But appreciation wasn't the same as inclusion, and Stella felt the difference acutely. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Jennifer Walsh said, appearing at Stella's elbow as she arranged cheese and crackers in the kitchen. Jennifer had been Eleanor's closest friend, a woman who'd watched Stella grow up and who'd always seemed to see her more clearly than her own family did. "I hope so. I think about her every day, especially when I'm baking. She taught me everything I know about reading people through their food preferences." Stella smiled at the memory of afternoons spent in Eleanor's kitchen, learning not just recipes but life lessons wrapped in flour and wisdom. "She saw something special in you, you know. That's why she—" Jennifer stopped abruptly, her wine glass freezing halfway to her lips. "Well, you know how much she believed in your dreams." But Stella didn't know, not really. Eleanor's will had been read months after the funeral, with Stella too deep in grief to pay close attention to the legal details. She'd been told about the inheritance in general terms, enough to fund her bakery, her grandmother's way of supporting the granddaughter who'd inherited her love of baking and her head for business. "Jennifer, can I ask you something about Grandma's will? I've been trying to access the inheritance to start my bakery, but the paperwork seems more complicated than I expected." Jennifer's expression shifted, becoming carefully neutral in a way that reminded Stella of her father's corporate face. "You should really discuss that with your parents, dear. Estate matters can be complex, and I wouldn't want to overstep." The non-answer felt like a door closing, though Stella couldn't understand why. Jennifer had been Eleanor's attorney and friend for decades. Who better to explain the details of her grandmother's final wishes? Of course, Stella replied, though unease was beginning to coil in her stomach like smoke from a distant fire. The party swirled around them, voices rising in celebration and laughter, but Stella found herself observing rather than participating. David stood slightly apart from Emma's friends, his expression politely interested but somehow detached. When their eyes met across the room, he offered a smile that seemed to acknowledge their shared status as outsiders looking in. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Stella helped her mother clear glasses and straighten cushions, the invisible labor that kept the Whitmore facade running smoothly. Emma had retreated upstairs with David, exhausted from being the center of attention, while Richard disappeared into his study with his scotch and what looked like a stack of financial documents. "Mom," Stella said as they worked side by side in the kitchen, "I wanted to talk to you about Grandma's inheritance. I've got my business plan ready, and I found this perfect spot in Boston's North End. The rent is reasonable, and with Eleanor's money, I could actually make this work." Patricia's hands stilled over the crystal she was drying. "Stella, honey, these things take time. There are procedures, tax implications. Your father is handling all of that. But it's been almost a year since she passed. How long do these procedures usually take? Every situation is different." Patricia's voice carried a note of finality that Stella recognized from childhood, the tone that meant the conversation was over whether she liked it or not. "The important thing is that we do everything properly according to Eleanor's wishes." Eleanor's wishes. The phrase echoed in Stella's mind as she finally made her way to her childhood bedroom, still decorated with the remnants of her teenage years. Posters of culinary school programs she dreamed of attending, cookbooks she'd collected since middle school, a bulletin board covered with recipes torn from magazines and handwritten cards from her grandmother. She pulled out one of Eleanor's recipe cards, her spidery handwriting still as familiar as Stella's own. "For my dear Stella," it read, "who understands that the secret ingredient in everything is love, but never forget that respect for yourself comes first." Respect for yourself comes first. Eleanor had said that often, usually when she thought Stella was being too accommodating, too willing to put everyone else's needs before her own. It had been their running debate, Eleanor pushing Stella to be more assertive, Stella insisting that family loyalty was more important than personal ambition. But tonight, Jennifer's abrupt silence and her parents' evasive answers planted seeds of doubt that Stella couldn't ignore. Eleanor had been many things: generous, wise, occasionally stubborn, but never unclear about her intentions. If she'd left money for Stella's bakery, she would have made sure the path to accessing it was straightforward. The house settled into quiet around her, the kind of deep silence that only came with real wealth. No thin walls, no neighboring televisions, no sounds of urban life bleeding through expensive windows. In this silence, Stella found herself remembering not just Eleanor's recipes, but her warnings. "Money changes people, sweetheart," Eleanor had said during one of their last conversations. "It makes them do things they never thought they'd do, justify choices they know are wrong. Promise me you'll never let it change who you are." Stella had promised, but now she wondered if the real question was whether money had already changed the people around her. The looks between her parents, Jennifer's careful deflection, the casual mention of unlimited wedding budgets while her own dreams remained perpetually deferred. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle she was afraid to solve. Outside her window, snow began to fall, dusting the manicured grounds with pristine white. By morning, everything would look perfect again, the kind of winter wonderland that belonged on Christmas cards. But Stella knew that beneath the surface, the ground was already frozen solid, and spring was still months away. Jennifer Walsh's words echoed in the darkness. "She saw something special in you." But what exactly had Eleanor seen? And more importantly, what had she done about it? The questions followed Stella into an uneasy sleep, where dreams of her grandmother's kitchen mixed with images of legal documents she'd never read, and conversations she was beginning to suspect she'd never been meant to hear. When she woke, she would still be Eleanor Whitmore's granddaughter, still be Stella Jenkins, who dreamed of opening a bakery. But she would no longer be willing to simply trust that the people who claimed to love her were telling her the truth. The questions followed Stella into an uneasy sleep, where dreams of her grandmother's kitchen mixed with images of legal documents she'd never read and conversations she was beginning to suspect she'd never been meant to hear. When she woke, she would still be Eleanor Whitmore's granddaughter, still be Stella Jenkins, who dreamed of opening a bakery, but she would no longer be willing to simply trust that the people who claimed to love her were telling her the truth. The morning light filtered through her childhood bedroom windows, casting familiar shadows across walls that no longer felt like home. Stella had barely slept, her mind churning through Jennifer Walsh's abrupt silence and her parents' evasive answers about the inheritance. By 7 a.m., she'd made her decision. Jennifer's law office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house in downtown Greenwich, the kind of understated elegance that whispered rather than shouted about money. Stella had called ahead, claiming she needed advice about starting a small business, which wasn't entirely a lie. But as she climbed the narrow stairs, her real purpose weighed heavily in her chest. "Stella, dear, what a pleasant surprise." Jennifer's greeting was warm but guarded, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. The office smelled of leather-bound books and the faint scent of her grandmother's favorite lavender perfume, a detail that made Stella's throat tighten unexpectedly. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by. I've been thinking about our conversation last night, about Grandma Eleanor and her belief in my dreams." Stella settled into the chair across from Jennifer's mahogany desk, noting how the older woman's hands fidgeted with a fountain pen. "I wanted to ask your professional opinion about business loans versus using inheritance funds for startup capital." Jennifer's laugh came too quickly, too bright. "Oh, honey, I'm sure your parents are handling Eleanor's estate properly. Your father has always been meticulous about financial matters." "That's just it. I've been trying to get details for months, and everyone keeps telling me to be patient. But you knew Grandma better than anyone. What would she have wanted?" The question hung in the air between them, and Stella watched something shift in Jennifer's expression. The professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the woman who had been Eleanor Whitmore's closest friend for 40 years. "Your grandmother was very specific about her wishes," Jennifer said carefully, then seemed to catch herself. "But I really shouldn't discuss client matters, even with family." "Jennifer, please. I'm not asking you to violate attorney-client privilege. I just want to understand what's taking so long. Other people settle estates in months, not years." Jennifer's resolve cracked like ice under pressure. She moved to her filing cabinet with the deliberate movements of someone making a decision she knew she'd regret. Eleanor left detailed instructions about everything. She was always so thorough, so concerned about fairness. The file Jennifer withdrew was thick, filled with documents that bore her grandmother's familiar handwriting alongside formal legal text. As Jennifer spread the papers across her desk, Stella felt the world shift subtly around her. "Your grandmother loved both you and Emma deeply," Jennifer began, her voice taking on the careful tone of someone navigating dangerous waters. "But she worried about Emma's relationship with money. She felt that a large inheritance might not serve her well." Stella leaned forward, her heart beginning to race. "What exactly did she leave us?" "To Emma, she left $50,000 and her jewelry collection. Beautiful pieces, certainly valuable, but Eleanor felt Emma would appreciate their sentimental value more than their monetary worth." Jennifer's fingers traced the edge of a document. "To you, she left $200,000 specifically earmarked for your bakery dreams, plus her recipe collection and business journals." $200,000. The number hit Stella like a physical blow. That was enough to secure a lease, buy professional equipment, hire staff, and still have operating capital for the first year. It was exactly what she needed to turn her dreams into reality. "Where is it?" The question came out as barely a whisper. Jennifer's face crumpled with the weight of what she was about to reveal. "According to the probate records, the money was transferred to your parents' accounts 6 months ago. The documentation shows it was for, quote, family expenses and Emma's upcoming wedding preparations." The room seemed to tilt. Stella gripped the arms of her chair, trying to process what she'd just heard. Her inheritance, her grandmother's carefully planned gift to support her dreams, had been redirected to fund Emma's fairy tale wedding. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. How is that legal? Grandma left specific instructions. Your parents are the estate executors. They have broad discretion about timing and distribution, especially when they claim the transfer serves the beneficiary's interests. Jennifer's voice carried the bitter tone of someone who'd seen too many families destroyed by money. They filed paperwork stating that funding Emma's wedding was essential for family harmony and that the inheritance would be restored to you once certain financial obligations were met. Stella's mind raced through the implications. What financial obligations? Jennifer hesitated again, then pulled out another document. There have been some irregularities in how your father has managed Eleanor's estate assets. Large withdrawals, transfers to accounts I don't recognize. When I questioned these transactions, I was told they were temporary measures to address cash flow issues. The words swam before Stella's eyes. Cash flow issues. Her father, who'd spent decades managing millions of dollars for other people, apparently couldn't manage his own family's finances without dipping into his daughter's inheritance. Jennifer, I need to see everything. All of it. What Jennifer showed her next made Stella's blood run cold. Pages of financial records revealed a pattern of transfers, withdrawals, and what could only be described as creative accounting. Money from Eleanor's estate had been moved through multiple accounts, mixed with Richard's personal funds, and ultimately used for everything from mortgage payments to credit card debt. But it was Eleanor's handwritten notes that broke Stella's heart completely. Page after page of her grandmother's careful script detailed her concerns about Richard's financial management, her worries about Patricia's spending habits, and most devastatingly, her fears that Emma's wedding would bankrupt the family if someone didn't intervene. She knew, Stella whispered, reading one particularly prescient note about Richard's quote 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 quote. Eleanor was worried about all of you. She structured her will very specifically to protect both her granddaughters from their parents' poor decisions. She never intended for your inheritance to subsidize their lifestyle or Emma's wedding. Jennifer's voice carried decades of professional frustration, but as executors, they had the legal authority to override her wishes, at least temporarily. Stella stared at the documents until the words blurred together. Her grandmother, who'd always seemed so wise and omniscient, had tried to protect her from this exact scenario. Eleanor had seen through her son's facade of financial success and her daughter-in-law's obsession with appearances. She'd structured her will as a lifeline for her granddaughters, not a bailout for their parents. What can I do? Legally? You could petition the court to remove your parents as executors, but that would require proving they've mismanaged the estate. It would be expensive, public, and would definitely destroy your family relationships. Jennifer's expression was grim. The alternative is to wait and hope they honor their promise to restore your inheritance once their financial situation improves. The choice Jennifer presented felt like no choice at all. Trust the parents who'd already betrayed her, or wage legal war against the only family she had. Either way, her dreams remained hostage to other people's poor decisions. As Stella left Jennifer's office, Eleanor's handwritten words echoed in her mind. Respect for yourself comes first. Her grandmother had seen this coming, had tried to prevent it, and had been overruled by the very people she'd tried to protect Stella from. The December air bit at her cheeks as she walked to her car, but the cold she felt went deeper than weather. For the first time in her adult life, Stella Jenkins was beginning to understand that family loyalty might be a luxury she could no longer afford. The question was whether she had the courage to do something about it. The questions followed Stella into an uneasy sleep, where dreams of her grandmother's kitchen mixed with images of legal documents she'd never read, and conversations she was beginning to suspect she'd never been meant to hear. When she woke, she would still be Eleanor Whitmore's granddaughter, still be Stella Jenkins, who dreamed of opening a bakery. But she would no longer be willing to simply trust that the people who claimed to love her were telling her the truth. The morning light filtered through her childhood bedroom windows, casting familiar shadows across walls that no longer felt like home. Stella had barely slept, her mind churning through Jennifer Walsh's abrupt silence and her parents' evasive answers about the inheritance. By 7 a.m., she'd made her decision. Jennifer's law office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house in downtown Greenwich, the kind of understated elegance that whispered rather than shouted about money. Stella had called ahead, claiming she needed advice about starting a small business, which wasn't entirely a lie. But as she climbed the narrow stairs, her real purpose weighed heavily in her chest. "Stella, dear, what a pleasant surprise." Jennifer's greeting was warm but guarded, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. The office smelled of leather-bound books and the faint scent of her grandmother's favorite lavender perfume, a detail that made Stella's throat tighten unexpectedly. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by. I've been thinking about our conversation last night, about Grandma Eleanor and her belief in my dreams." Stella settled into the chair across from Jennifer's mahogany desk, noting how the older woman's hands fidgeted with a fountain pen. "I wanted to ask your professional opinion about business loans versus using inheritance funds for startup capital." Jennifer's laugh came too quickly, too bright. "Oh, honey, I'm sure your parents are handling Eleanor's estate properly. Your father has always been meticulous about financial matters." "That's just it. I've been trying to get details for months and everyone keeps telling me to be patient." "But you knew Grandma better than anyone. What would she have wanted?" The question hung in the air between them, and Stella watched something shift in Jennifer's expression. The professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the woman who had been Eleanor Whitmore's closest friend for 40 years. "Your grandmother was very specific about her wishes," Jennifer said carefully, then seemed to catch herself. "But I really shouldn't discuss client matters, even with family." "Jennifer, please. I'm not asking you to violate attorney-client privilege. I just want to understand what's taking so long. Other people settle estates in months, not years." Jennifer's resolve cracked like ice under pressure. She moved to her filing cabinet with the deliberate movements of someone making a decision she knew she'd regret. Eleanor left detailed instructions about everything. She was always so thorough, so concerned about fairness. The file Jennifer withdrew was thick, filled with documents that bore her grandmother's familiar handwriting alongside formal legal text. As Jennifer spread the papers across her desk, Stella felt the world shift subtly around her. "Your grandmother loved both you and Emma deeply," Jennifer began, her voice taking on the careful tone of someone navigating dangerous waters. "But she worried about Emma's relationship with money. She felt that a large inheritance might not serve her well." Stella leaned forward, her heart beginning to race. "What exactly did she leave us?" "To Emma, she left $50,000 and her jewelry collection. Beautiful pieces, certainly valuable, but Eleanor felt Emma would appreciate their sentimental value more than their monetary worth." Jennifer's fingers traced the edge of a document. "To you, she left $200,000 specifically earmarked for your bakery dreams, plus her recipe collection and business journals." $200,000. The number hit Stella like a physical blow. That was enough to secure a lease, buy professional equipment, hire staff, and still have operating capital for the first year. It was exactly what she needed to turn her dreams into reality. "Where is it?" The question came out as barely a whisper. Jennifer's face crumpled with the weight of what she was about to reveal. "According to the probate records, the money was transferred to your parents' account 6 months ago. The documentation shows it was for family expenses and Emma's upcoming wedding preparations." The room seemed to tilt. Stella gripped the arms of her chair, trying to process what she'd just heard. Her inheritance, her grandmother's carefully planned gift to support her dreams, had been redirected to fund Emma's fairy tale wedding. "How is that legal?" Grandma left specific instructions. "Your parents are the estate executors. They have broad discretion about timing and distribution, especially when they claim the transfer serves the beneficiary's interests." Jennifer's voice carried the bitter tone of someone who'd seen too many families destroyed by money. They filed paperwork stating that funding Emma's wedding was essential for family harmony, and that the inheritance would be restored to you once certain financial obligations were met. Stella's mind raced through the implications. What financial obligations? Jennifer hesitated again, then pulled out another document. There have been some irregularities in how your father has managed Eleanor's estate assets. Large withdrawals, transfers to accounts I don't recognize. When I questioned these transactions, I was told they were temporary measures to address cash flow issues. The words swam before Stella's eyes. Cash flow issues. Her father, who'd spent decades managing millions of dollars for other people, apparently couldn't manage his own family's finances without dipping into his daughter's inheritance. Jennifer, I need to see everything, all of it. What Jennifer showed her next made Stella's blood run cold. Pages of financial records revealed a pattern of transfers, withdrawals, and what could only be described as creative accounting. Money from Eleanor's estate had been moved through multiple accounts, mixed with Richard's personal funds, and ultimately used for everything from mortgage payments to credit card debt. But it was Eleanor's handwritten notes that broke Stella's heart completely. Page after page of her grandmother's careful script detailed her concerns about Richard's financial management, her worries about Patricia's spending habits, and most devastatingly, her fears that Emma's wedding would bankrupt the family if someone didn't intervene. She knew, Stella whispered, reading one particularly prescient note about Richard's, quote, concerning gambling habits, and Patricia's denial about their true financial situation. Eleanor was worried about all of you. She structured her will very specifically to protect both her granddaughters from their parents' poor decisions. She never intended for your inheritance to subsidize their lifestyle or Emma's wedding. Jennifer's voice carried decades of professional frustration. But as executors, they had the legal authority to override her wishes, at least temporarily. Stella stared at the documents until the words blurred together. Her grandmother, who'd always seemed so wise and omniscient, had tried to protect her from this exact scenario. Eleanor had seen through her son's facade of financial success and her daughter-in-law's obsession with appearances. She'd structured her will as a lifeline for her granddaughters, not a bailout for their parents. What can I do? Legally? You could petition the court to remove your parents as executors, but that would require proving they've mismanaged the estate. It would be expensive, public, and would definitely destroy your family relationships. Jennifer's expression was grim. The alternative is to wait and hope they honor their promise to restore your inheritance once their financial situation improves. The choice Jennifer presented felt like no choice at all. Trust the parents who'd already betrayed her, or wage legal war against the only family she had. Either way, her dreams remained hostage to other people's poor decisions. As Stella left Jennifer's office, Eleanor's handwritten words echoed in her mind. Respect for yourself comes first. Her grandmother had seen this coming, had tried to prevent it, and had been overruled by the very people she'd tried to protect Stella from. The December air bit at her cheeks as she walked to her car, but the cold she felt went deeper than weather. For the first time in her adult life, Stella Jenkins was beginning to understand that family loyalty might be a luxury she could no longer afford. The question was whether she had the courage to do something about it. Stella sat in her car outside Jennifer's office for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel as her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Eleanor had tried to protect her, had seen through the family's facade of financial stability, and had been systematically overruled by the very people who claimed to love her most. The drive back to the Whitmore estate felt different now, weighted with knowledge that changed everything. The manicured lawns and elaborate Christmas decorations no longer spoke of success and tradition. They whispered of desperation and deception. How much of their lifestyle was built on borrowed money and stolen inheritances? Instead of confronting her parents immediately, Stella made a different choice. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number Jennifer had reluctantly provided. Rivera Forensic Accounting, Marcus speaking. His voice was professional but warm, carrying the slight accent that spoke of first-generation success. Jennifer had mentioned him in passing, a former IRS investigator who'd gone private, someone who specialized in untangling complex family financial situations with discretion. "Mr. Rivera, my name is Stella Jenkins. Jennifer Walsh gave me your number. I think I need your help." The coffee shop where they met was deliberately unremarkable, a chain restaurant near the highway where neither of them would encounter Greenwich's social elite. Marcus Rivera was younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of quiet intensity that suggested someone accustomed to finding truth buried in numbers. "Jennifer mentioned you might call," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "She seemed concerned about your family's estate management." Stella found herself studying his face. Angular features that suggested intelligence, dark eyes that missed nothing, hands that moved with precise economy. There was something reassuring about his stillness, as if he'd learned that the most important revelations came to those who knew how to wait and listen. "My grandmother left me money for a bakery. My parents redirected it to fund my sister's wedding." "Jennifer says it's legal, but not necessarily ethical." The words came out more calmly than she felt. "I need to know if there's more to this story." Marcus opened a leather portfolio and withdrew a legal pad, his movements methodical. Estate irregularities often reveal broader financial patterns. If your parents diverted inheritance funds, there may be other transactions worth examining. What kind of transactions? Tax shelters that cross legal boundaries, hidden assets, income manipulation, gambling debts disguised as business expenses. His pen moved across the page as he spoke, creating what looked like a decision tree. People don't usually steal from their children unless they're desperate. Desperation makes people creative with financial regulations. The clinical way he described her family's potential crimes should have been disturbing, but instead, Stella felt something like relief. Finally, someone who understood that family loyalty had limits, that love didn't excuse theft. "What would you need to investigate?" "Access to financial records, bank statements, tax returns, investment accounts, credit card statements going back at least 2 years. Marcus looked up from his notes. "This won't be pleasant, Ms. Jenkins. Financial investigations reveal family secrets that can't be unknown once discovered." Stella thought of Eleanor's handwritten warnings, of her parents' meaningful glances, of Emma's casual assumption that money would always be available for her dreams, while Stella's remained perpetually deferred. "My grandmother tried to warn me. She knew something was wrong." Stella's voice strengthened with each word. "I owe it to her memory to find out what." Marcus nodded, closing his portfolio. "Then we'll start with the estate transfers and work backward. If your parents redirected inheritance funds, there will be documentation trails. The question is whether you're prepared for what those trails might reveal." As they shook hands outside the coffee shop, Stella felt the weight of a decision that would change everything. No more accepting vague explanations or trusting family promises. Eleanor had left her more than money. She'd left her the tools to fight back. The investigation was about to begin. Marcus Rivera's folder sat on the passenger seat of Stella's Honda like a loaded weapon as she pulled into her parents' circular driveway. 3 days had passed since their meeting at the coffee shop, 3 days during which she'd absorbed the devastating scope of her family's deception. The forensic accountant's findings were meticulously documented: tax shelters that crossed the line into fraud, gambling debts that stretched back years, and at the center of it all, her grandmother's inheritance. $200,000 transferred without her knowledge or consent to cover her father's mounting obligations. The December afternoon was gray and cold, matching her mood as she walked toward the house that had once represented security and love. Now it felt like approaching a beautiful mausoleum, its perfection hiding decades of rot beneath the surface. She found her parents in Richard's study, the masculine sanctuary, where he'd once managed millions of dollars in client portfolios, before his gambling addiction and poor judgment had destroyed his career. Our mother sat in the leather chair beside his desk, reading glasses perched on her nose as she sorted through what looked like credit card statements. They both looked up when she knocked on the doorframe, and the guilt that flashed across their faces told her everything she needed to know. "Stella, sweetheart," Patricia said, quickly shuffling the papers into a neat stack. "We weren't expecting you today. I need to talk to you both." Stella stepped into the room and closed the door behind her, the click of the latch sounding final in the heavy silence. "About Grandma Eleanor's inheritance. About what you've done with my money." Richard's face went ashen, his hand trembling as he reached for the crystal tumbler that sat perpetually filled with whiskey on his desk. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Stella pulled Marcus's folder from her bag and set it on the desk between them. "I hired a forensic accountant. I know about the $200,000 you transferred from my inheritance account. I know about the tax shelters, the hidden gambling debts, all of it." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's hands fluttered to her throat, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. Richard stared at the folder as if it contained his death warrant, which, in many ways, it did. "You hired an accountant?" Patricia's voice was barely above a whisper. "You investigated your own family?" "My family stole from me." The words came out harder than Stella had intended, but she didn't soften them. "My grandmother left me that money for a specific purpose. She trusted me with her legacy, and you violated that trust." Richard's facade finally crumbled completely. His shoulders sagged, and when he looked up at her, his eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. "Stella, you have to understand. I never meant for any of this to happen. The investments were supposed to pay off. The gambling was supposed to be temporary." "Gambling?" Stella's voice rose. "What gambling?" "The poker games at the club started innocently enough," he continued, the words pouring out like water from a broken dam. "Just friendly games with clients. But then I started going to Atlantic City, and there were the online accounts." His voice broke. "I thought I could win it back. I thought I could fix everything before anyone had to know." Patricia reached for his hand, her own shaking. "We were trying to protect you girls. To protect the whole family. If people knew about Richard's problems, if the IRS started looking too closely at our finances, so you decided to steal from me instead?" Stella's anger was a living thing now, growing with each rationalization they offered. "You took the money my grandmother left me, money she specifically wanted me to have, and you used it to cover up Dad's gambling addiction?" "It's more complicated than that," Patricia said, her voice taking on the manipulative tone Stella remembered from childhood arguments. "Emma's wedding is so important, and there were expenses we hadn't anticipated. Your father's business had some setbacks. We fully intended to pay you back." "With what money?" Stella slammed her hand on the desk, making them both flinch. "According to these records, you're leveraged to the limit. The house has 2 mortgages, your credit cards are maxed out, and you owe hundreds of thousands in back taxes. Where exactly were you planning to find $200,000 to pay me back?" Richard's composure disintegrated completely. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry. God, Stella, I'm so sorry. I know what Eleanor meant to you. I know what that money was supposed to represent. But I was desperate. The debts were crushing us, and I convinced myself that family money should help family problems. But I'm not family, am I?" The words tasted bitter on Stella's tongue. "Not when it comes to Christmas presents or college tuition or having my dreams taken seriously. But when you need money to cover your gambling debts, suddenly I'm family enough to steal from." Patricia's mask slipped entirely, revealing the calculating woman beneath the perfect facade. "That's not fair, Stella. We've always loved you. You're being dramatic." "Dramatic?" Stella's voice was ice. "You stole my inheritance to pay for Emma's engagement party. You've been lying to me for months about why I couldn't access my own money. And now that I've caught you, you want to call me dramatic?" "Emma doesn't know," Richard said suddenly, looking up with desperate eyes. "She has no idea where the money came from. This would destroy her if she found out." The manipulation was so blatant, so familiar, that Stella almost laughed. "So now I'm supposed to protect Emma's feelings about the money you stole from me? I'm supposed to keep quiet so she can have her perfect wedding funded by my grandmother's legacy?" "She's your sister," Patricia said, playing her final card. "And she loves you. We all love you. Families protect each other, Stella. They don't destroy each other over money. You already destroyed this family when you decided I was worth less than Emma." Stella closed Marcus's folder and tucked it back into her bag. You made that choice, not me. What are you going to do? Richard's voice was small, defeated. Stella looked at her parents, really looked at them, and saw strangers wearing the faces of people she'd once trusted completely. Her father, the man who'd taught her to ride a bike and helped with her homework, was a compulsive gambler who'd stolen from his own daughter rather than face his failures. Her mother, who'd kissed her scraped knees and baked her favorite cookies, had orchestrated the theft and tried to manipulate her into accepting it. I want my money back, she said simply. All of it. Within 30 days. Patricia's laugh was sharp and brittle. 30 days? Stella, be reasonable. Even if we could liquidate some assets. You can't, can you? Stella felt the last of her hope die. There's nothing left to liquidate. You've spent it all. The silence confirmed what she already knew. Her parents had burned through her inheritance as thoroughly as they'd burned through their own wealth, leaving nothing but debt and devastation in their wake. Then you've made my decision for me, Stella said, standing up. Since you can't return what you stole, I'll have to pursue other options. What does that mean? Patricia's voice was sharp with fear. It means I'm done protecting this family's secrets. Stella moved toward the door, each step feeling like a small victory over the girl who'd spent years making herself smaller to fit into their perfect picture. Marcus has already identified multiple tax violations that cross into criminal territory. The IRS would be very interested in your creative accounting methods. You wouldn't. Richard's voice was a broken whisper. You wouldn't destroy your own family. Stella paused at the door, her hand on the knob. You destroyed this family the moment you decided I was expendable. I'm just cleaning up the mess you left behind. As she walked back to her car, she could hear her mother's voice rising behind the closed door, probably already strategizing damage control. But it was too late for that. The perfect Christmas facade had finally cracked beyond repair, and Stella was done pretending she could live in the ruins of their lies. Stella's hands trembled as she drove away from her parents' house, the confrontation replaying in her mind like a broken record. The December air felt sharp against her skin as she pulled into the parking lot of the small garden center, where her grandmother's workshop still stood. A converted shed that Eleanor had transformed into her private sanctuary during the last years of her life. The building looked smaller than Stella remembered, weathered cedar shingles and frost-covered windows giving it the appearance of something forgotten. But when she turned the key that she'd kept on her keychain since Eleanor's death, the familiar scent of vanilla and cinnamon enveloped her like a warm embrace. Her grandmother had always kept candles burning here, claiming they helped her think. Inside, everything remained exactly as Eleanor had left it. Copper mixing bowls gleamed on open shelving, recipe cards were pinned to a corkboard in Eleanor's careful handwriting, and bags of flour and sugar sat in airtight containers, as if waiting for their owner's return. This was where Eleanor had taught Stella the difference between baking and cooking, how baking required precision and faith, while cooking allowed for improvisation and forgiveness. Stella sank into the wooden chair beside the small table where she'd spent countless afternoons learning her grandmother's secrets. The business ledgers Eleanor had kept were still stacked neatly in the corner, documenting decades of careful financial planning that had built the inheritance now stolen by her son. Her phone buzzed. Marcus Rivera's name appeared on the screen. How did it go? His voice was gentle but concerned. About as well as you'd expect. Stella's laugh was hollow. They can't pay it back, Marcus. There's nothing left to recover. A pause. I'm sorry, Stella. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. Actually, it is. The words surprised her even as she spoke them. I mean, I hoped they'd do the right thing, but part of me needed to know for certain that they'd chosen Emma over me so completely. Now I do. What will you do now? The question hung in the air as Stella fingered one of Eleanor's recipe cards, her famous snickerdoodles, written in fading blue ink. I need some time to think. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? I want to go over those tax documents again. After she hung up, Stella lit one of the candles from Eleanor's collection and watched the flame dance in the growing darkness. The shed felt like a shrine to everything her grandmother had valued. Hard work, integrity, and the belief that a person's worth wasn't measured by their bank account, but by their character. The door opened with a soft creak, and David Chen stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. Emma said you might be here. She's worried about you. Stella looked up at him, this man who would soon be her brother-in-law, who'd had the misfortune of falling in love with a woman whose family was built on lies. Did she tell you what happened today? No, but she said you had some kind of argument with your parents. David settled into the chair across from her, his expression serious. And honestly, I've been wanting to talk to you anyway. There are things about your family that don't add up. Such as the way they treat you, for one thing. David's voice carried a frustration that surprised her. At every family gathering, you're working while Emma's being celebrated. Your parents talk about Emma's achievements constantly, but I had to ask Emma directly to learn that you graduated summa cum laude from college. Stella felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. You noticed that? I'd have to be blind not to notice it. And then there's the money thing. David leaned forward. Emma talks about this inheritance from your grandmother like it's some distant possibility, but she's planning a wedding that costs more than most people's annual salary. When I ask where the money's coming from, she gets vague and says her parents are handling everything. The candle flickered between them, casting shifting shadows on the walls lined with Eleanor's baking equipment. Stella made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. David, what I'm about to tell you might change how you feel about marrying into this family. Over the next 20 minutes, she told him everything. Marcus's findings, the stolen inheritance, her father's gambling addiction, the web of tax evasion that could bring criminal charges. David listened in silence, his expression growing more troubled with each revelation. Jesus, he breathed when she finished. Emma has no idea? None. She thinks the money for her wedding is coming from my parents' legitimate wealth. She has no idea it's actually my grandmother's legacy, meant for my bakery. David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Stella recognized from the time she'd seen him dealing with difficult problems at work. This explains so much. Why your parents were so eager to have the wedding quickly. Why they kept pushing for more expensive options, when Emma wanted something simpler. Emma wanted something simpler? At first, yes. She talked about a small ceremony, maybe something outdoors. But your mother kept suggesting upgrades, saying the Chen family would expect a certain level of presentation. His voice was bitter now. I should have realized they were performing wealth instead of actually having it. The revelation that Emma had originally wanted a modest wedding hit Stella harder than she'd expected. It suggested that her sister's entitlement wasn't as complete as it appeared, that perhaps Patricia had orchestrated much of the excess that had consumed Stella's inheritance. What are you going to do? David asked. Stella looked around the workshop, at the tangible evidence of her grandmother's dreams and values. Eleanor had built her wealth through decades of careful decisions and ethical business practices. She'd left specific instructions about her legacy because she'd understood that integrity mattered more than family peace. I'm going to report them to the IRS, she said quietly. Tomorrow morning. David nodded slowly. Good. The simple word carried weight that surprised her. You're not going to try to talk me out of it? Point out that this could destroy Emma's wedding? Maybe send her father to prison? Stella, they stole from you. They violated your grandmother's wishes and used your inheritance to fund a lifestyle they couldn't afford. David's voice was firm. If Emma can't understand that what they did was wrong, then maybe I need to reconsider whether I want to marry someone who values family loyalty over basic morality. The support felt foreign after years of being told she was too sensitive, too rigid in her expectations. This is going to hurt Emma terribly. Yes, it will. But lies hurt more in the long run than truth does. And if we're going to build a marriage, I'd rather it be on honest ground than stolen money. After David left, Stella remained in the workshop until late into the night, surrounded by the ghost of her grandmother's presence. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Marcus's number again. It's Stella, she said when he answered. I've made my decision. Set up the meeting with the IRS. I want to file the report first thing Monday morning. Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no taking it back. Stella looked at Eleanor's recipe for snickerdoodles, remembering how her grandmother had always said the secret ingredient was courage, the willingness to take risks for something worth creating. I'm sure, she said. My grandmother didn't build her legacy so her son could gamble it away. She left that money to me because she believed I would honor her values. It's time I proved her right. As she finally locked the workshop and walked back to her car, Stella felt something she hadn't experienced in months: certainty. The choice between family harmony and personal justice was no longer a choice at all. Eleanor's voice seemed to whisper in the winter wind, reminding her that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's destruction. Tomorrow would bring consequences that would change everything. But tonight, surrounded by the memory of her grandmother's integrity, Stella knew she was finally ready to choose truth over comfort, justice over peace. The doorbell's chime cut through the Christmas Eve laughter like a blade. Stella watched from the kitchen doorway as her mother froze mid-sentence, her champagne glass suspended halfway to her lips. The formal dining room was filled with extended family and close friends, all gathered around the polished mahogany table laden with Patricia's carefully orchestrated feast. "I'll get it," Richard said, but his voice carried a tremor that made several guests glance up from their conversations. Through the frosted glass panels, Stella could see the silhouettes of two men in dark coats. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the moment she'd set in motion 3 days earlier, when she'd walked into the IRS field office with Marcus at her side. Richard opened the door to reveal Agent Harrison and Agent Clark, their badges gleaming under the porch lights. "Mr. Richard Whitmore?" "Yes?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Internal Revenue Service. We have a warrant to search these premises, and formal notification of criminal tax investigation proceedings." Agent Harrison's voice carried through the house like a death knell. The dining room erupted. Uncle Gerald dropped his fork with a clatter. Emma's future mother-in-law gasped audibly. Jennifer Walsh's wine glass slipped from her fingers, red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. Patricia's mask of Christmas perfection shattered completely. "There's been some mistake," she said, her voice rising to near hysteria. "This is Christmas Eve. We have guests." "Ma'am, please calm down," Agent Clark said firmly. "We need Mr. Whitmore to accompany us for questioning, and we'll need access to all financial records and electronic devices." Emma stood from her chair so abruptly it toppled backward. "What's happening? Dad, what are they talking about?" But Richard was already crumbling, his face ashen as he gripped the doorframe for support. "I can't. I need to sit down." That's when Patricia's gaze found Stella across the room, and the look of pure hatred that passed between them made several guests step back involuntarily. "You," Patricia whispered, her voice carrying venom that silenced the room completely. "You did this." Stella stepped forward, her hands steady despite the chaos erupting around her. "I reported financial crimes. Nothing more, nothing less." Emma's voice cracked like breaking glass. "Stella? What crimes? What's she talking about?" The moment stretched like a taut wire before David Chen stood up, his presence commanding attention from everyone in the room. "Emma," he said gently, "your parents stole Stella's inheritance to pay for our wedding." The words landed with devastating precision. Emma's face went white, her hand flying to her throat as if she couldn't breathe. As Stella watched her family's Christmas Eve celebration collapse into federal investigation and public humiliation, she felt no satisfaction, only the hollow certainty that some truths were too toxic to remain buried, even when exposing them destroyed everything in their path. The days between Christmas and New Year's felt like living in the aftermath of a natural disaster. Stella sat in her Boston apartment, watching news vans pull away from her parents' Greenwich house on her laptop screen. Former hedge fund manager charged with tax evasion read the headline on the Hartford Courant's website, accompanied by a photo of Richard being led away in handcuffs. Her phone had been ringing incessantly, reporters, distant relatives, former family friends demanding explanations. She'd stopped answering after the third call from Emma, each message more desperate than the last. "Please, Stella, we need to talk. Dad's in jail, they're seizing everything." "I don't understand what's happening." Marcus Rivera knocked on her door with coffee and legal documents, his presence the only steady thing in her upended world. "The asset forfeiture hearing is scheduled for next week," he said, settling across from her at the small kitchen table. "The government is moving fast." "How much will they take?" "Everything they can directly tie to the tax evasion. The house, the cars, Richard's investment accounts. What's left of them anyway? Marcus consulted his notes. The good news is they've located about $60,000 of your inheritance money in various accounts. It's not the full amount, but it's something. 60,000. Enough to start her bakery on a much smaller scale, but not enough to erase the betrayal. What about criminal charges? Richard's looking at 2 to 5 years minimum. The gambling addiction might help with sentencing, but the prosecution is pushing hard because of the amount involved and the length of time the fraud continued. Through her window, Stella could see the small storefront she'd been eyeing for her bakery. Still available, still waiting. The irony wasn't lost on her that her family's destruction was finally making her dreams possible, albeit in a diminished form. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Emma's asking if she can see you. She's not doing well. For 3 days, Stella had avoided thinking about her sister's pain. Emma's fairy tale engagement had crumbled overnight, her wedding canceled as the Chen family distanced themselves from the scandal. The golden child who'd never faced a real consequence was now confronting the collapse of everything she'd taken for granted. Patricia had been relentless in her campaign to paint Stella as the villain. Social media posts from family friends hinted at ungrateful daughters and family betrayal, though they stopped short of naming names. The whisper campaign was effective. Stella had already received 2 calls from Boston acquaintances asking if the family troubles in Connecticut involved her. Jennifer Walsh had been the lone voice of support, calling to express her pride in Stella's courage. Your grandmother would be proud, she'd said. Eleanor always believed that sometimes love means holding people accountable for their actions. But the validation felt hollow when weighed against the devastation she'd caused. Emma's sobs echoed in her memory from the voicemails she'd listened to once before deleting. Her sister had never asked for their parents' crimes, had never chosen to benefit from stolen money. She'd simply accepted what was offered, trusting that her family's love was genuine. Marcus reached across the table, his hand covering hers. You did the right thing, Stella. I know it doesn't feel that way right now, but criminal activity doesn't become acceptable just because it happens within a family. I know that intellectually, Stella said, staring at the dregs of her coffee. But Emma lost everything because of choices I made. Her engagement, her wedding, her relationship with our parents. She's probably going to lose the only home she's ever known. She lost those things because of choices your parents made, Marcus corrected gently. You just refused to be complicit in covering them up. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the city in the same pristine white that had once made her family's Christmas decorations look so perfect. Stella thought about Eleanor's workshop, now probably sealed as part of the asset forfeiture process. All those recipe cards and mixing bowls, the tangible pieces of her grandmother's legacy, trapped in legal proceedings. Her phone rang again. This time, it was a number she didn't recognize. Hello? Stella, it's David. Emma gave me your number. She's asking if you'll see her. Just once. She needs to understand what happened. Through the silence, Stella could hear Emma crying in the background, the sound of someone whose entire world had been revealed as a carefully constructed lie. Where? Stella asked, already knowing she couldn't refuse, despite everything. Emma stood in the hallway outside Stella's apartment like a ghost of her former self. Gone was the radiant golden child who'd floated through life on a cushion of privilege and parental adoration. This Emma wore wrinkled jeans and a ratty college sweatshirt, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was hoarse from crying. Thank you for seeing me, she said, following Stella into the cramped studio apartment. I wasn't sure you would. Stella watched her sister take in the tiny space, the Murphy bed, the secondhand furniture, the kitchen that was barely more than a closet with appliances. Emma had never seen how Stella actually lived, had never ventured beyond the comfortable bubble of Greenwich to witness her sister's daily reality. This is where you've been living? Emma's voice carried genuine shock. Mom always made it sound like you had a nice place in Boston. Mom says a lot of things that aren't true. Stella gestured toward the small couch, the only seating in the room. We're both learning that now. Emma perched on the edge of the cushions, her hands twisting in her lap. I don't understand how this happened. How I didn't know. David keeps trying to explain it to me, but I feel so stupid, so blind. You weren't stupid. You were protected. Stella settled beside her, maintaining careful distance. That's what parents are supposed to do, protect their children. The problem is they decided only one of us deserved that protection. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She doubled over slightly, pressing her hands to her face. Oh God, Stella, the things I've said to you over the years, the way I've acted, I thought you were just, I don't know, choosing to struggle, being dramatic about money. I know what you thought. There was no bitterness in Stella's voice, just exhaustion. I used to think maybe I was being dramatic too. It's easier to believe you're oversensitive than to accept that your parents see you as expendable. Emma looked up, tears streaming down her face. They don't see you as expendable. They love you. Emma, Stella's voice was gentle but firm. They stole $200,000 from me, money that Grandma Eleanor specifically left for my future. They used it to fund your engagement party, your wedding plans, Dad's gambling debts. They lied to me for months about why I couldn't access my own inheritance. That's not love. That's theft. The stark facts seemed to physically pain Emma. She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly. I keep trying to remember if there were signs I missed, but they made everything seem so normal, so effortless. When I wanted something, it just appeared. I never asked where the money came from. Why would you? You were raised to believe it would always be there. But you weren't. Emma's voice cracked. Even when we were kids, you always had jobs. Summer jobs, after-school jobs. I thought you just liked working, but you were paying for things, weren't you? Things they should have paid for. Stella nodded. College textbooks. Car insurance. Half my tuition. Even though they told you they were covering everything. The admissions came easily now. The secrets she'd carried to protect Emma's innocence. I told myself it was teaching me responsibility. Building character. While I got everything handed to me, Emma's laugh was bitter. Character! God, what character do I have? I'm 25 years old, and I've never even balanced a checkbook. I don't know how to budget or pay bills or live in the real world. David's been trying to help me understand our finances for the wedding, and I kept brushing him off because Daddy was handling everything. You can learn those things. Can I? Emma looked around the apartment again, this time with different eyes. You learned them because you had to. I don't know if I'm strong enough to live like this. You're stronger than you think. Stella meant it. But strength isn't the real issue here, Emma. The question is whether you can accept what Mom and Dad did, or if you're going to keep making excuses for them. Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. Mom's been calling me constantly, telling me this is all a misunderstanding, that you're being vindictive and cruel. She says families are supposed to stick together, that we should be helping Dad fight these charges instead of what you're doing. And what do you think? I think... Emma's voice was barely a whisper. I think she's terrified that if I accept what they did to you, I'll realize what they did to me too. The insight surprised Stella. What do you mean? They turned me into someone who couldn't survive without them. Someone so dependent on their approval and their money that I'd never question where it came from. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. David's been trying to tell me for months that I needed to be more involved in our financial planning, our future. But I kept putting it off because I knew Daddy would take care of everything. I was 25 years old and still calling my father Daddy. There's nothing wrong with trusting your parents. There is when they're criminals. The words seemed to shock Emma as she said it. They're criminals, aren't they? This isn't just some accounting mistake or family disagreement. Dad's going to prison. Stella nodded. Probably. And Mom helped. She knew about the gambling, knew about the stolen money, and she helped cover it up. Emma's voice grew stronger with each admission. She's been lying to both of us our entire lives. Yes. Emma stood up abruptly, pacing to the small window that looked out over the street. I need to testify, don't I? In the civil proceedings to get your money back. David says there might be more assets they can recover if I cooperate with the investigation. That's your choice, Emma. I won't ask you to choose between your parents and me. But I do have to choose. Emma turned back to face her sister. I can keep pretending this is all some terrible mistake, or I can accept that the people who raised us are capable of theft and manipulation and lies. There's no middle ground anymore, is there? No, Stella said quietly. There isn't. Emma nodded slowly, something resolving in her expression. Then, I choose you. I choose the truth. Whatever it costs. For the first time since Christmas Eve, Stella felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope that her sister might still be worth saving. The morning of May 15th dawned bright and clear as Stella turned the key in the lock of her new bakery. Eleanor's Legacy read the modest sign above the door, painted in Eleanor's favorite shade of sage green. The space was small, just 6 tables and a display case, but it was hers, built with the recovered inheritance money and a small business loan she'd qualified for on her own merit. Emma looked up from the industrial mixer, where she was preparing the morning's batch of snickerdoodles, flour dusting her apron, and a genuine smile lighting her face. The cream cheese Danish sold out yesterday, she said, pride evident in her voice. Mrs. Patterson said they're better than the ones from that fancy place in Greenwich. The transformation in Emma over the past 4 months had been remarkable. After testifying in the civil proceedings that recovered an additional $40,000 of Stella's inheritance, she'd moved into a small apartment near Stella's bakery. David had helped her find work as a receptionist at a local nonprofit, where she was slowly learning the satisfaction of earning her own paycheck. Any word from Marcus about the final asset distribution? Emma asked, efficiently shaping dough into perfect crescents. Should be finalized next week. Stella arranged fresh muffins in the display case, each one made from Eleanor's carefully preserved recipes. Jennifer Walsh called yesterday. She's setting up the scholarship fund in Grandma's name. Full-ride business grants for first-generation college students. Emma paused in her work, a shadow crossing her face. They'd both attended Richard's sentencing 2 weeks earlier, 3 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. Patricia had refused to speak to either of them since Emma's testimony, her bitterness complete and unyielding. Do you think we'll ever be able to forgive them? Emma asked quietly. Stella considered the question as she watched the morning sun stream through the bakery windows, illuminating the framed photo of Eleanor that held pride of place behind the register. I think forgiveness and trust are different things. I can forgive Dad for being weak and desperate, but I'll never trust him with my future again. The door chimed as their first customer of the day entered. David, carrying coffee and the newspaper, his engagement ring once again gleaming on Emma's finger. Their wedding was planned for August, a simple ceremony in the community garden behind the bakery, funded entirely by their own savings. Ready for another day of honest work? He asked Emma, kissing her cheek as she untied her apron. Stella smiled as she watched them together. Emma finally learning what real love looked like when it wasn't built on lies and financial dependence. Outside, the world continued its patient turning. But inside Eleanor's Legacy, 3 people who'd chosen truth over comfort were building something real from the ruins of betrayal. The apartment above Eleanor's Legacy smelled of cinnamon and hope as Stella surveyed the simple Christmas decorations she'd hung throughout the small space. A year had passed since the federal agents had shattered her family's perfect facade, and this Christmas Eve bore no resemblance to the opulent celebrations of her childhood. Instead of crystal and gold, mason jars held pine branches from the tree lot down the street. Instead of hired caterers, Stella had spent the afternoon baking bread and roasting a modest chicken with Emma's help. They're here, Emma called from the window, her voice carrying the nervousness that still surfaced whenever family gatherings approached. Through the glass, Stella could see Marcus parking his car, Jennifer Walsh emerging from the passenger seat with a covered dish, and David climbing out of the back with a bottle of wine. The doorbell rang, and soon the small apartment filled with the kind of laughter Stella had never experienced in the Greenwich house. Genuine, unforced, built on shared affection rather than social obligation. Marcus kissed her cheek as he hung his coat, their relationship having deepened into something steady and real over the months of rebuilding. Jennifer bustled into the kitchen with her famous green bean casserole, the same dish she'd brought to Whitmore gatherings for decades, though now it graced a table where honesty was the only currency that mattered. "Any word from your father?" Jennifer asked gently as they arranged food on the small dining table. "He calls Emma once a week from prison," Stella replied, her voice neutral. "He's in a program for gambling addiction. Says he's making progress." Emma looked up from arranging napkins, her expression complicated. "He asked if you might visit sometime." "I told him that was your decision to make." The possibility hung in the air, neither woman pushing for an answer. Stella had learned that forgiveness was a process, not a destination, and that healing didn't require her to pretend the wounds had never existed. A soft knock interrupted the moment, and Emma moved to answer it. Patricia stood in the hallway, her once perfect appearance now showing the wear of a year spent facing consequences. Her silver hair was less perfectly styled, her expensive clothes replaced with department store substitutes. In her hands, she carried a worn wooden box that Stella recognized immediately. "I brought something that belongs to you," Patricia said, her voice smaller than Stella remembered. She held out Eleanor's recipe box, the one she'd hidden away after the funeral. "Your grandmother meant for you to have this." Emma stepped aside, allowing their mother to enter. The room fell silent except for the soft Christmas music playing from Stella's ancient radio. Patricia's eyes took in the modest apartment, the simple decorations, the evidence of her daughter's hard-won independence. "I know I have no right to be here," Patricia continued, her composure cracking. "I know what I did was unforgivable, but I couldn't let another Christmas pass without acknowledging that you were right. About everything." Stella accepted the recipe box, her fingers tracing the familiar wood grain. Inside were dozens of cards in Eleanor's careful handwriting, including the snickerdoodle recipe that had started it all. But tucked beneath the recipes was an envelope she'd never seen before, addressed in Eleanor's script. For Stella, to be opened on her first Christmas as a business owner. With trembling hands, Stella opened the envelope and read her grandmother's final letter aloud. "My dearest Stella, if you're reading this, it means you found the courage to build something meaningful from the ashes of disappointment. Remember that true family wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the integrity we pass to the next generation. You have always been my greatest pride, not because of what you achieved, but because of who you chose to become when life tested your character. The money I left you was never the real inheritance. Your strength, your values, your refusal to accept less than you deserve, that is the legacy I pray you'll carry forward." Patricia wept quietly as the words filled the room, her tears the first genuine emotion Stella had seen from her mother since childhood. "She always knew," Patricia whispered. "Eleanor always knew Richard and I would fail you. That's why she left specific instructions, why she made Jennifer promise to watch over the will." As they sat down to their simple feast, Stella looked around the table at the people who had chosen truth over comfort, integrity over ease. Emma, learning to build a life on her own terms. David, proving that love could survive the collapse of illusions. Marcus, whose steady presence had shown her what partnership looked like when built on honesty. Jennifer, who had honored Eleanor's memory by supporting Stella's courage. And even Patricia, finally acknowledging the damage her choices had caused. The Christmas lights twinkled outside the window, and Stella realized that this modest celebration built on authentic relationships was what Eleanor had always envisioned when she spoke of true family wealth. Not the performance of perfection, but the quiet satisfaction of lives lived with integrity, relationships built on truth and love that didn't require anyone to diminish themselves to earn it. As they raised their glasses in a toast to Eleanor's memory, Stella felt her grandmother's presence in the room, not as a ghost of Christmas past, but as the living foundation of everything good they had built from the ruins of betrayal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.